On behalf of the Educator Effectiveness Committee, I call this meeting to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Appel, not present. Dr. Armstrong, Mr. Birkin, Mr. Castile, Ms. Champagne, Dr. Clark,
Here.
Mr. Harris, Mr. Hollis, Ms. Holloway, not present. Ms. Bellerin, not present. Mr. Morris, not present. Ms. Altier. We have a quorum.
Thank you. First item, please.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 5.1 through 5.3.
May I get a motion?
Birkin,
A second.
Harris.
Second. Thank you. Any information from LDOE?
Move on to the next.
No.
Your first item is on page 1, item 2.1, consideration of certification preparation pathway proposals. The recommendation is to approve as outlined.
May I get a motion? Is there a second, a third? Thank you. Does the department have any information to provide? No. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Any objection?
No objection, this motion passes. Next one.
Okay. Your next item is on page 3, item 3.1, consideration of an update report regarding the Teacher Certification Appeals Council. The recommendation is to receive the minutes and approve the membership appointment.
May I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Birkin?
Okay. Any presentation from LDOE? No. Any comments or questions from the board? Any objections? This item passes.
Your next
Next.
item is on page 11, item 3.2, consideration of an update report regarding the 2022-2023 workforce. The recommendation is to receive.
May I get a motion? Second. Dr. Chason?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Jenna Chason, Department of Education. And this afternoon, I am eager to share with you all our annual snapshot of the educator workforce. We are seeing some positive results from the hard work and commitment to improving our workforce of our many stakeholders, and we also have some areas to focus on to grow. Just a little history about this state workforce snapshot. This really began as a data collection and report back in 2016. And this used to be a static report, but this is now a live dashboard for our school systems to use within our EdLink 360 data dashboard. And we release this data every spring. And this looks like an end-of-year snapshot collection. And so all of the data that I'm going to share with you today in this highlight is really end-of-year data. And what we do is we also capture data from October to show retention. So this is data from the end of year of last year showing information about our workforce, and then in comparison to October of this year to show who returned from the end of last year and began this school year. The purpose of this snapshot is to communicate annual workforce data and trends to stakeholders and to support decision-making for statewide improvements regarding recruitment and retention. It provides data in the areas of demographics, certification, recruiting and hiring, evaluating results, compensation, and retention. Today I'll be sharing with you all a high-level overview of some of the state-level data that is now available on our website, but I also want to note that we also produce regional snapshots as well. And these 4 regional snapshots summarize workforce data for each region. While the same workforce data elements are displayed in the regional snapshots, these reports disaggregate data based on that region and also show a comparison from that individual region to the state. So let's dive into some of the data. I think you all will find this very interesting. Some of this overview, we'll take it one point at a time, then dive in a little deeper. But we definitely had some key takeaways, a lot of which were very positive, or at least very interesting to note. Our total teacher workforce increased by over 1,700 teachers. This is the highest number of teachers employed in our state in 10 years. So we can make some anecdotal assumptions about this. This is most probably due to an increase in funding. We know that there has been a large amount of stimulus funding in our state, and so this led to presumably smaller class sizes. This led to the hiring of additional workforce members in the form of coaches for teachers, literacy coaches, interventionists. And so all of that increased this overall number to over 1,700 more people employed in our teacher workforce. Also a little note about class size. In fact, more than half of Louisiana's classrooms have less than 21 students in them. And so those class sizes were notably small during this past year. Another note is the average teacher salary increased by $2,286. This is inclusive of the statewide $2,000 teacher stipend. So that's also important to note. Our teachers of color increased by 2% to 31% of our overall teacher workforce. And just note that in comparison, 58% of our students are students of color in our state. And so this is important to note. We also were able to increase our number of certified special education teachers by 163. So this is no longer a critical shortage area in our state. We now are employing 163 more certified special ed teachers. And we really believe this is a result of a lot of our teacher preparation programs encouraging dual certification. So we're seeing more of our graduates hold both an elementary education and a special education certification. And so we overall increased our amount of special education teachers. Yes, Mr. Birkin?
Am I allowed to ask a question?
You
'Cause
absolutely can.
I'll forget it if I don't. So, special education teachers increased by 163. How many what is the increase of special ed students, or have there been?
So that has remained steady. That's on one of our next slides.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Our special education students make up 14% of our overall student population, and that has remained steady.
Thank you.
Another important note is our retention rate has overall remained pretty steady. However, we did increase by 4% our retention rate for teachers with 2 to 10 years of experience, and we had a really great jump of retaining 11% of our teachers with 21 plus years of experience. Just noting here that this is very important when we think about our retention of new teachers and the mentorship and the guidance that can be provided from some of our more experienced teachers to our newer teachers to the workforce. So that's an important note there. Another bright spot that's not part of this data report, but one that I wanted to mention that I think is a highlight, is that our teacher preparation enrollment is up since the 2020-2021 school year by over 1,500 pre-service educators between both our undergraduate and our post-baccalaureate programs. So that's really important to note. We have 1,500 more teacher preparation candidates in those programs today than we did the year before. We also have 450 high school students currently in the pre-educator pathway across our state. So these are students who are taking education courses as part of their high school experience to begin preparing them for being teachers. So we have 450 of those high school students in those courses right now, which is another very exciting note. These are our demographics at a glance. Our total teacher workforce, as I stated earlier, did increase by over 1,700 teachers, although our student enrollment did decrease by about 7,500 students. our students with disabilities percentage and our English learner percentage did remain the same. The next slide shows a snapshot of compensation. So as I stated previously, we did see the average teacher salary increase by $2,286, but we also have here assistant principals, principals, and central office, noting that that central office amount does not include our superintendents. The next slide shows a snapshot of hiring. So the 2% increase in the number of teachers hired is reflective of that total increase of over 1,700 that I spoke about earlier. But I also wanted to note the 10% increase in the number of teachers hired in our CIR schools. Our CIR schools have a comprehensive intervention required label. And so these academic labels are given to schools who are a D or an F for 3 years. And so these are considered our schools in most need of support. And so the table shows that 7,901 new teachers were hired overall in 2022-2023, and that makes up 15% of our total teaching population. 2,434 of those 7,901 were hired in positions at our CIR schools, which is 31% of all new teachers hired. So this is telling us that 31% of new teachers hired were placed in our comprehensive intervention required schools. I think this does make sense since our schools with academic labels are typically more difficult to staff and would have more vacancies for these new teachers to enter into. Unfortunately, it does also mean that our teachers with the least experience are staffing our neediest schools. The next slide is a snapshot around retention. We are retaining about 85% of our educator workforce. We are still not at the pre-COVID percentage, which was an 88% retention rate. So we're still not quite there, but working towards it every year. And as I noted earlier, the retention rate increased 4% for teachers with 2 to 10 years of experience and 11% for teachers with 21 plus years of experience. When you think about that 21 plus years of experience, I believe some of who we saw exiting were a lot of our retirees due to COVID. And now we see that pace slowing, and we see some of those 21 plus year teachers really staying longer in the profession, and we're retaining more of them. And that accounts for that 11% hike that we see here this year. So who are we losing when we look at this slide? We are still only retaining 78% of our first-year teachers and 79% of our first-year school leaders. And this data really points to the importance of that first-year experience. And if you recall from the slide before, a disproportionate amount of our new teachers are going into some of our more challenging schools and serving our students with the greatest needs. So this data will certainly drive how we provide guidance to our school systems on hiring, placement, and support of our first-year teachers. We've done a great amount of work around what we call our New Teacher Experience Project, providing strong guidance to school systems around how to form up a teacher's first 3 years in the profession. And we've also done a lot of that outreach ourselves as we're working with teachers in years 1 through 3. This data tells us that it is important work and that we need to keep going to see the impact of it. Next, we'll take a deeper dive into who we are retaining to see our certification rate. I know this is something that is always very important to everyone, is our percentage of certified teachers. We've been asked multiple times to break this out into traditional schools and charter schools, and so we're doing that here on this slide. And we see that 67% of our total teacher population is certified. We do have 17% who are out of field, who are certified but teaching in a subject that they are not certified in, and 16% uncertified. 70% of teachers in traditional public schools are certified in the courses they are teaching, and so we have seen that rise by 1% over the last year. And just one last note there, you see the difference between the traditional schools and the charter school certification percentages. And I think important to remember that charter law does not require certification of teachers. It does require a bachelor's degree. So my final slide today in this data snapshot really looks at what I would consider to be a very important cohort to track. These were our teachers who were hired into our school systems during the 2019-2020 school year. And so you see that we have 648 who came out of undergraduate, or what we would call traditional teacher preparation programs. And we had 899 hired from our post-baccalaureate, or what we would also call our alternate certification programs. And this is an important cohort to track because their first year was the year of COVID. And so they went home during that fourth 9 weeks, many of them to virtual learning experiences, virtual teaching experiences for these teachers. And then you see the percentage that returned from both of those different pathways in the 2021 year, the 21-22, and then again in 22-23. And we know that these years really represent a multitude of challenges between COVID regulations, and also the storms that we've experienced as a state, which I'm sure led to some retention issues as well. And so this does tell us that teachers prepared in a traditional program are more likely to stay in the classroom, because you do see that difference. You note by the end of these years, 76% of our teachers from traditional pathways remained teaching, and 69% of our alternative certification teachers remain teaching. And so just a few notes about why teachers leave. We do produce what's called a teacher exit survey report every December that we turn in to the legislature. And this exit survey is given to teachers as they exit their employer, as they exit their LEA. It is not anonymous, and it's through the school system. And so we've been taking a very careful look at that exit survey and are planning some changes to it, because although it provides us some good data, we do believe it could provide us much better data. And we've had a lot of discussion with board members about it, with other stakeholders, with teachers who have taken this exit survey, where they've told us they really don't feel very comfortable putting in the survey why they're leaving and where they're going to, because it's not anonymous. And so we actually brought this survey to our February Teacher Advisory Council meeting and got some feedback from those teachers. And we plan on making some changes to that exit survey. But I wanted to, at minimum, let you all know what our most recent exit survey report that we submitted to the legislature in December told us about our exiting teachers. The number one reason why teachers put in their survey that they left were 32% resigned due to personal circumstances. And so that doesn't tell us a whole lot. We know that's could be a whole host of things within those personal circumstances. And so that's part of the revisions that we plan to make to that survey and that survey process. We were also informed through the exit survey that 17% accepted a teaching or leadership position still within Louisiana. So this could be folks moving into an assistant principalship or principalship, going to their central office, or moving between school systems. And 16% left due to retirement. And so those were the top 3 reasons why teachers were exiting. Another note that I wanted to make before concluding this presentation was just around our vacancy numbers. This is something that we've been tracking in real time in our EdLink 360 dashboard. And we do periodically capture those numbers. We have improved our data collection method over the last several years. And in January of 2022, we reported to the board that we had 2,250 teacher vacancies. We've seen, even through our improved data collection mechanisms, That number has not increased, it's in fact decreased. And our January 2024 snapshot tells us that 1,146 vacancies remain in the state. That does not include uncertified teachers. That number only includes when there is no teacher of record. So you either have a short or long-term substitute in the classroom, or maybe the students are being dispersed. So that's 1,146 teacher vacancies that are being reported currently as of January 2024. I think that's really interesting to note, considering that our systems hired more. We have 17 more teachers this year, but we still have around the same vacancy rate of around 1,150 teachers. And that amount has stayed steady for about the past 2 years now. So a few things to highlight in conclusion is that we are very encouraged to see our teacher preparation program candidate amount up. We're very encouraged to see our teachers who have over 21 years experience being retained more. We need them there. We need them there supporting our newer teachers. And then interesting to monitor in the next 2 years. As we know, our stimulus funding really dwindles and comes to an end. It'll be interesting to monitor the vacancy numbers. Will they remain the same even though the total workforce has increased? As we see systems having less funding to maybe hire for some of those additional positions that they're staffing currently. This concludes my report on some of the key takeaways from this year's workforce snapshot, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Of the 1,150 vacancies, what, is there particular fields that more of, highly specialized? Where are those? Rural?
No, we don't capture that in this data collection. We do have, I believe, a Bessie report on critical shortage areas, and that's something that's reported by individual school systems to tell us what particular areas they may be in need of. And I know special education was one of those areas, and now it's not, because we have increased our number of special education teachers.
Any other questions from the board? Mr. Perkins?
So if we're, have 1,150 shortage, but we're still at 21 kids or less per class, having to think about that.
Yeah, so we have 1,146 self-reported teacher vacancies by school systems, but we increased our total amount of teachers by 1,700, but our overall student population has decreased, which means our class sizes have decreased, and some of our additional staffing, like literacy coaches, interventionists, has increased.
So they're not necessarily classroom teachers. It's
Right.
other instructional education positions. Okay. Thank you for a very in-depth report. Any other questions from the board? Okay. Thank you very much for your report. We do have a couple of comment cards. I have Dr. Richard Baker from Louisiana Federation of Teachers. Thank you for coming today. And Ms. Caroline Romer with LAPCS.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Thank you, Board. This report is important because it helps the public understand issues faced by schools and districts in hiring the best persons to lead classes. While this report portrays the issue as getting better, the reality in schools is more challenging. Nearly 2/3 of teachers in a survey that we conducted said that they supervise additional classes due to a lack of substitutes. Teachers tell us that they are affected by the numbers of vacancies in their schools. Every school needs enough well-prepared teachers to cover the curricular requirements. 84% of teachers substituted or covered additional classes from our survey. Nearly 2/3 were doing it more than once a month. This happens during what is their legislated planning time, to plan assignments, score student work, and correspond with parents. In some schools, the classes of the missing teacher are split, making other teachers responsible for additional students. This pushes the number of students a teacher is responsible for above the limits in Bulletin 741. When a teacher has more students to teach than 26 elementary or 33 middle or high school students, this adds to teacher stress and workload. It is detrimental to all students assigned to that classroom for the day. It affects the teacher's working conditions and increases the likelihood of discipline issues. While this report shows the number of teachers has increased, it leaves one to infer that the number of positions are being filled by highly qualified educators. By reporting the top line number this way, it makes the number of positions needed to put well-qualified teachers in front of all students. It obscures a problem which teachers are facing, vacancies, which I was glad to hear spoken about. The problem is that a third of those persons leading classes are working towards certification or were emergency hires. While it is important to have adults in the room, if those adults have not been fully prepared to bring out the best in students, then the work is challenging for them, tough for all other educators, and challenging for the students whom they are leading. This report would be a good place to include teacher vacancy numbers. While it is good that the teacher salaries have increased, the costs of living have left all school employees behind. Last year, the American Institute for Research reported that in Louisiana, the minimum living wage for a single parent of 2 children was more than $86,000. Stipends and supplements are not the same as a living wage. The top line retention number on slide 10 is presented to suggest everything is fine or getting better. The attrition reported is like that reported by education preparation providers. I saw these similar patterns while I was working in a university. There will always be attrition of newly hired teachers because life happens. What should alarm is that if you take the newly hired numbers on slide 7 and estimate where those will be after 3 years of attrition, there will be fewer well-qualified teachers coming out of each of those pathways. So you'll have, for example, 363 undergraduates left in 3 years and 466 post-bac in 3 years. These data continue to show the patterns from the last decade have not changed. The number of certified educators is declining. It also continues to show that those who become teachers through universities and colleges are retained longer. There is a lot of capacity for someone who wants to become a teacher. Today we heard about new programs being created around the state. Louisiana does not have a capacity problem to create certified teachers. The problem is getting someone to want to become an educator. Leading students to develop their best selves and continually recreate Louisiana neighborhoods and communities should be something that more people should want to do. Citizens don't want to be teachers is only 1/3 of the sentence. The rest of the sentence is they don't want to be educators under those conditions for that salary. If the goal is to have certified teachers in front of all students, then working conditions and salaries must be addressed and improved. Thank you for your time.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Baker. Ms. Romer?
Caroline Romer, Executive Director, Louisiana Association of Public Charter Schools. First comment is we wanted to say thank you to this type of reporting. We do believe it's so important to be looking at this type of information to tell the full story of what's going on in our classrooms. I think it's with that type of data that we do problem solving and solutions and understand what is working on behalf of our teachers and our students. So I truly support that information. Second point, Dr. Chasson covered it. There was reporting on teacher certification for charter schools. As she stated, charters by law are not required to have certified teachers, but she also pointed out we do have to meet other standards like bachelor's degree. Our teachers also have to go through background checks. We do teacher evaluation. And just as a reminder, charters were created to be innovative. Oftentimes that innovation gets stuck in just one particular place, like are you getting better results for kids? But it's also about the hiring, our budgets, our curriculum, all of those things that you have given us autonomy around to make decisions with the understanding you make bad decisions, you don't get to keep doing the work. So it becomes so critical as an authorizer, which you are the largest authorizer in the state, to again understand what the expectations are for those schools, holding us accountable to those results, and knowing what the data is telling you. But we do not believe that it's always about putting mandates on the inputs. It's about, again, setting standards on the outputs and ensuring that schools are meeting those standards. Thank you.
Sorry.
Dr.
Thank you,
Clark.
Ms. Roma.
Dr. Clark.
Yes, Mr. Castillo?
Actually, I'd like for Dr. Baker to come back down. Sorry, Ms. Romer. So, Dr. Baker, I greatly appreciate your comments, and let me acknowledge very appreciatively Dr. Chasson's report and what we're doing at the department, and I think you acknowledge that that's an important report also. But your comments to some extent had me feeling a little bit, maybe not helpless, but certainly looking for more solutions. And that is, if you had to choose or suggest to us one or two things that we might be doing differently. We know compensation is an issue, and you would probably start there, and you know our limitations as BESI members, but beyond the compensation discussion, which is a very important one, what other recommendations would you have for either us as members of BESI or the department in terms of moving the needle in the way that you suggest?
The best recommendation I have, and the safest one for me to make here, is to ask you to talk with more teachers that are doing this work every day. What I have seen in the surveys that are coming, and there was a new survey that was released yesterday from the Pew Foundation, which was looking very much like the data that we have seen as far as what type of policy recommendations. Our teachers are working morning, noon, and night. They are taking work home with them. I have seen, I'm not going to try and quote that number. If I were, it's a lot that are working 2 and 3 additional jobs to make, which still brings us back to compensation. They are having a hard time doing all the work that is required. And when they have, relative to this report, as we're looking at workforce, I feel like we're missing something. And part of that is requiring teachers that are doing the work and lifting the burden in those vacancies, or lifting the burden for those teachers who are not fully certified, those persons not fully certified. Somebody has to help them along. And that's the teachers in the room that are already doing a lot of work already. I'm sorry I don't have a set of policy recommendations prepared today.
Well, if I could ask you to, because you attend our meetings frequently and we're all trying to solve the problem, certainly greater compensation would help. And if we get more teachers, then that lessens the heavy workload that you described. And then we want, of course, our teachers to be as prepared as we possibly can. But I think everybody's trying really, really hard. Very much value your opinion. So as you think of other specific suggestions for us, I see it every day in school. I see our teachers challenged. I see the workload being great. And the more we can help problem solve, that will be helpful.
The best I have, sir, again, just based on the conversations and the data that I have seen, relative to, for example, school performance scores, everyone is trying to chase a number. Everyone is trying to get that score to keep, bad things from happening. And therefore, there's some other things that happen when we focus so hard on one number, and that one number becomes everything. One of the things that they are challenged with, for example, are disruptive students. Some of them are struggling, and that's one place. I would just say is that to help teachers teach the students that came there to learn every day. When they have students that are returned to class because someone doesn't want a report written, then that becomes challenging for the teachers that are there trying to teach the 95, 98% of students that did come to learn every day.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know how to work this thing. I was trying to request to speak, but I did just want to follow up quickly with what he's saying and to answer your question a little bit. And I don't want to speak too much for other teachers, but I do, while I have this floor, want to say the State Department is listening and to teachers. And right now, some of the work we're doing with the Let Teachers Teach work group has been around a lot of this discussion. So again, I don't want to lay out all the recommendations right now because that's the work of the committee that we're hopefully going to bring to you by the next meeting. But what I do want to say is just like one insight I glean from this beautiful report, which thank you so much for presenting it, is like when we look at that, the CIR schools, and as someone who's worked in them before, a lot of times those schools and those teachers need the most support, but what's given instead is the most reports and the most additional work because we're looking for accountability there. So it becomes work on top of an already more challenging job. So when I see new teachers there, these are the new baby teachers that, again, even through some mentorship programs, as opposed to getting more support, sometimes that support comes out as more work for them to do. Like, hey, you want to learn how to lesson plan? Here's more professional development and more on top of more, and it becomes really drowning. So when we look at supporting our CIR schools and our new teachers, it's how do we take that workload and actually lessen it to where we're supporting as opposed to putting more on top. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about in the work group. So I'm excited to share those recommendations. And I think they echo a lot of what you're saying. So I appreciate that comment. And now I'll stop speaking.
No, you're okay. Any other comments? Any objections to the motion? Nope. Motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is on page 17, item 4.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 746, Louisiana Standards for State Certification of School Personnel regarding mentor teachers. The recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 746.
May I get a motion? Mr. Harris, second by Mr. Preston. No, I'm sorry, okay. Any discussion from the board?
Any objections?
Any objections? Motion is approved. Next item.
Your next item is on page 35, item 5.4, consideration of executive session regarding discussion of the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of a person. The recommendation is to convene executive session.
Can I get a motion to go into executive session? I always mess up on that part right there. Motion made by Mr. Castile and seconded by Ms. Champagne. Any public comment or board discussion on the matter before we take a roll call vote?
Yeah, 6.2.
Okay. In order for this motion to pass, 2/3 affirmative vote of members present is required. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Appel? Yes. Dr. Armstrong? Yes. Mr. Birkin? Yes. Mr. Castile? Ms. Champagne? Yes. Mr. Harris? Yes. Mr. Hollis? Yes. Ms. Holloway is not in attendance. Ms. Mellering? Yes. Mr. Morris? Dr. Clark?
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes. I will advise the audience at this time we are going into an executive session. No votes will be taken while in executive session. All votes will be made in public. Additionally, public disclosure is not required of matters discussed in a properly held executive session. At this time, the Executive Effectiveness Committee meeting stands in recess to go into executive session. Can I get a motion to reconvene from the meeting and continue with our regular order of the agenda at this time on the items discussed in executive session? Mr. Harris? Mr. Edmonds, very good. Next item, please.
Who was the second? Sorry. Your next item is on page 36, item 5.5, consideration of the revocation of the Louisiana Level 1 certificate issued to Ms. Shanikia Bickham. The recommendation is to revoke or remove from suspension.
May I get a motion? Can I get a second? Mr. Hollis?
Any opposed?
Any opposed? This motion carries. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 43, item 6.1, consideration of a records review regarding the issuance of a Louisiana teaching credential appropriate to the credentials of Ms. Jamie Gill. The recommendation is to grant, deny, or defer.
May I get a motion? Mr. Harris is the grant. A second? Okay. Any objections? This motion passes.
Your next item is on page 59, item 6.2, consideration of a records review regarding the issuance of a Louisiana teaching credential appropriate to the credentials of Ms. Emily Plaisance. The recommendation is to grant, deny, or defer.
Can I get a motion? Mr. Hollis, motion to grant, I'm sorry. Can I get a second?
Second, sure.
Okay. Any objection? This motion passes.
Your next item is on page 78, item 6.3, consideration of a records review regarding the issuance of a Louisiana teaching credential appropriate to the credentials of Mr. Jody Shepard. The recommendation is to grant, deny, or defer.
Can I get a motion? Mr. Hollis to grant, and second, Mr. Harris. Any objections? This motion passes.
All right, that concludes your agenda.
We do have support. And a second, Ms. Jennifer Thomas, interim superintendent for Emily Plaisance to grant. Thank you. This concludes my agenda.